Hello and welcome everyone to this episode of the Afghanistan podcast. Joining me today, I have Evarist Bartolo from the beautiful country of Malta, which is in the European Union.
Thank you for
Ev-
this invitation.
Thank you for joining us, Everest. Everest is a distinguished, has had a distinguished career in the government. He was Foreign Minister of Malta from 2020 to 2022, and previous to that, Everest also served as the Education and Employment Minister of Malta. So lots of experience, and I'm really looking forward to this, Everest. So, so Everest,
Okay.
Everest, I'm speaking to you at the moment from the UK. As it happens, actually, my wife is half Maltese and half English.
That's interesting.
So we have a lot of love and a lot of discussions about Malta. I was there not too long ago. It's a beautiful country. I would recommend it to anyone listening. If you haven't been to Malta, definitely go. Um, Everest, so just to start with, just to talk about the relations between the UK and Malta, UK kind of was the colonial kind of power ruling over Malta, I think until 1964. Is
Yes.
that right?
4 million years, but we remained a military base till 1979.
Yes. So do you actually consider your independence as 79, which is very recent?
Yes, very recent. Political independence did come, as you say, in 1964. But basically, as we still were a military base, quite a lot of control of the country was still in the hands of the British, especially as we are small. And so if you need the airport and if you need the port, there is very little else. So that is one of the biggest problems we had with the military presence here, that it didn't even allow any space for a normal economy to develop. And that's why, in our case, sovereignty,
What's important?
democracy, and I would say neutrality are
Yes.
bound together,
I was,
politically and economically, I would say.
I was so impressed when I visited Malta. It has so many influences from Italian to British to Middle Eastern. You can kind of see a bit of a reflection of everything.
Yes, because we have a history of about 8,500 years. The first time we were settled from Sicily was about 8,500 years. Since then, every culture in the Mediterranean has somehow or other come to Malta,
Right.
sometimes in friendship, sometimes an invasion. And in fact, we have been invaded at least 24 times.
Wow.
And mostly it was competing, the different powers in the Mediterranean competing to control Malta or to deny Malta to others.
Yes. Yes.
And that has been our fate, and it still remains, I think, a challenge even today.
It
How
is
to
a challenge.
survive,
Yes.
as a small country, and have some room for maneuver to be able to develop in your interest and not to serve others. It's a
Exactly.
challenge. It's a big challenge.
How did Malta react to the UK's Brexit, leaving European Union, because there was close relations between that? So how did that
Yes.
affect?
Well, in our case, we were worried for at least two reasons. We were, to a certain extent, because of the financial services sector in the UK and the financial services sector in Malta, which was also initially modeled on the UK. We used to be natural allies to sort of take care of that sector. Also, because of the basically nearly 200 years of Westminster politics in Malta, uh, we have inherited a lot of British traditions, which are different from the continental political traditions. I'm not saying that they are better or
Yes.
worse, but they are definitely different.
Yes.
So we lost that kind of comfort zone that we had, but mainly where we have been impacted quite negatively is in the medicine sector,
I see.
because we are a small market, so we depend on other markets to buy our medicine, and unfortunately the medicine manufacturers do not look very, very kindly at small markets, because for them it's a hassle where the profit margin then is not so high. So we used to get our medicine from the UK. Since then, we've had to reroute it mostly from Ireland, I would say, and from other places as well. And that has economic considerations. Prices are higher. So, but we've tried to do all we can to maintain the relationship that we have had.
Yeah.
Because, for example, tourism from the UK is still quite important, though we have a diversified,
Yeah.
sources of tourism.
What is the biggest source of income for Malta? Is it tourism? I know that there's
Well,
quite
it's
strong.
quite diversified. Thank goodness we do not depend on one sector.
Yeah.
Tourism is very important. Together with Spain, we have the highest sector for tourism when it comes to employment, when it comes to wealth creation, about 16%. Then iGaming is very important. Financial services,
Yes.
manufacturing is still important. Sectors like pharmaceuticals, and also the microchip, the microelectronic sector, which is also very, very important.
I was reading
There is still some ship repairing. Though now it is in private hands. Agriculture is obviously very small because the country is small, and we have never, till recorded history, grown enough food for ourselves, even when the population was not over 500,000 as it is now, but it was 20,000. Even then, we had problems because being in the Mediterranean, it's a dry weather, and we have very few springs, very few, and when very much dependent on rain. We used to be. Now, obviously, with processing seawater, that has solved our problem. But that used to be a huge problem for Malta.
Yeah.
Drought, and lack of water used to be a huge problem.
I was reading an article recently saying that Malta is becoming the European Dubai or UAE. So I don't know whether you agree with that and what you think about that.
I am not happy about that. Because I think, okay, I can understand that in some areas we need to build and build and build. But for a small country like us, even for our mental health,
Yeah.
it's important that we do not build everywhere. And the little countryside and valleys that we have, I think we should definitely not spoil those. We should have zones where, yes, let's have high towers, let's have big buildings, and at the same time, I still believe that a country should not be just buildings.
Yes.
It should have its own. It should have its own culture. It should have its own identity, and even though obviously identity, which doesn't mean that you like your country and hate others, because unfortunately, we're living at a time when being patriotic means not only that you love your country, but that you have contempt for others, or that you like your culture and then you don't accept other cultures. In fact, I think even most of the geopolitical issues of today is our inability to live together as equals, respecting each other.
Hey there. I hope you're enjoying this episode. Let me just take a moment to introduce our sponsors for today. This episode is kindly being sponsored by the Worldwide Listings Company Limited, or WLC for short. WLC is a complete A to Z Amazon account management service. So if you're looking to start an e-commerce business, or you already have a business that you want to take to the next level, then get in touch and WLC will be able to help. Just for transparency purposes, let me also mention that WLC is a company that I personally created and am a director of. So when you get in touch with WLC, you will be speaking with directly myself or my team, and we very much look forward to speaking with you to see how we can serve your needs. Thank you. And with that said, let's get back to the episode. Yes. And that brings me to talk about what's happening with Russia and Europe. When this war in Ukraine started, I think it was 2022, um, March or something. So
Yes,
in
February.
February, I think.
Towards the
So
end of February, yes.
yes, so you were still foreign minister. I think you had another month to go. So how did you see that whole build up of
Oh,
what
it's
was?
tragic,
As I see it, it was such an avoidable war, and it's
tragic,
such a tragic thing that we've ended up where
tragic,
we are.
tragic. Let me tell you something which happened to me today. Actually, I received a letter, a message, because today we it's not letters, it's electronic messages from a family in Ukraine, and telling me that a few days ago their 34-year-old son, who has heart condition, was picked up. Was actually people came to the house and took him forcefully to send him to the front
Well,
without any training, without any protective
yeah,
clothing. He has a heart condition. His family is devastated. And this is how Ukraine is being destroyed. It is
exactly.
so irresponsible of European leaders, like Starmer, like Macron, like Tusk, and like Merz, who do not send their sons and daughters to
Yep,
war, who are telling the Ukrainians, keep on fighting. It is so terrible. It is so terrible. From what we know, over 1.5 million Ukrainians have been killed in this war. On the side of Russia, it's about 100,000. These are not the figures that we hear in our media, because there's a lot of, to put it mildly, there's a lot of news management of
yes,
how the war is being reported. We call it news management technically. It's actually lies. It's lying. But as you said, this war broke out, I would say, way back in 1999,
mm,
when Clinton, because it is President Clinton, who decided that NATO should grow and should expand towards the east. Going back on an assurance that was given in Malta by President Bush to Gorbachev when they met here in 1989, there was the famous meeting in December 1989 where they, where
that was in
they,
Malta.
yes, where they discussed, well, it should have been the end of the Cold War. It should have been the end of the Cold War, where Gorbachev told Bush, listen, the Soviet Union will not impose on the Eastern European countries anymore the political and economic system of their countries. They decide what to do.
Yeah.
So we're going to relax that very strong control on them. They are not going to remain our satellites anymore. And Bush promised that, he told him, and the American ambassador who was there tells us this, Jack Matlock. He said Bush told him, Mikhail, we will not take advantage of this. We will not take advantage of this. And then we know that one promise after the other was broken. First, they
Yes,
promised that not an inch closer, and then started year after year getting other Eastern European countries and surrounding Russia, because they said Russia is too weak. We can humiliate Russia. We don't care what Russia says and what Russia thinks, and we're just going to introduce, everyone is going to be allowed to join NATO, including Ukraine. Ukraine was a very, very big red line for Russia. And
yes,
and American diplomats, I'm not going to quote Russian diplomats or Russian politicians, I'll just quote American politicians and American diplomats who were responsible enough to say, listen, we should not be doing this.
mm,
This is very serious. If we do it, this will cause war. And we're talking about 17 years ago. So this is not something that
yes,
happened last 2 years ago, 3 years ago. And unfortunately, the diplomacy that we need to be able to live together in this world, to try and see how we can improve life, was not used at all. Was not used at all. And this is what has caused the war. The war could have been avoided. Imagine, way back, I was born in 1952. I remember when I was 10 years old, something terrible was happening, which I couldn't understand. But people were telling me, we might have the end of the war, the end of the world. And I said, end of the world. And I used to hear words like Khrushchev, Canada, Cuba. And then eventually, as I grew up, I understood that, yes, we were very close to the end of the World War, because at that point,
Yes.
when the Soviet Union put missiles in Cuba, the United States rightly felt threatened and said, listen, take them away or we're going to have a war. With diplomacy, they managed to solve that crisis and war was averted.
Yes.
We have not learned from there, because had we learned from there, we wouldn't have allowed this to happen. The same way that the United States could not accept missiles in Cuba, Russia cannot accept missiles in Ukraine.
Of course.
And it's a tragedy. It's a tragedy because Zelensky himself was elected on the platform of living together with the Ukrainian Russians that they have in Ukraine, because that is also a big problem, and it's a tragedy. Then, after it started, I remember the Russian minister Sergei Lavrov writing to all of us as foreign ministers of the European Union, reminding us of all the treaties that we've had in the last 50 years, since Helsinki, since the Organization for Cooperation and Security in Europe, which was designed to prevent what has happened. Because the idea was, let's have a cooperative security system where I will protect my security. But that doesn't mean that I will threaten your security, because that is what cooperative security is about. Gorbachev had the beautiful dream of let's build a common European home from Lisbon, to Vladivostok, from Portugal to Russia. Obviously, that has remained not only a dream, it has become a nightmare because Europe is divided again. So it's a tragedy that something that could have been avoided, using the treaties of working together, caring for each other's security, thinking that a partner could be humiliated and I don't care what he says about his security.
Yeah.
It was terrible. It was terrible.
Everest, you're so right. I think since the end of Cold War, there's been so many tragic, lost opportunities. If I think about what happened with Libya, how they gave up their nuclear weapons.
Don't tell me about Libya, because that is another painful story.
Yes. And that was such a
Let
loss
me
of...
tell you something which perhaps
Yes.
is not known.
Yes.
I was lucky about 3 summers ago to meet the former president of the European Commission, Romano Prodi. The story that I'm going to say, I don't even know whether he has actually told it, but I will say it. I will say it because it shows that how these wars, how these tragedies can be avoided. There is nothing inevitable about them.
Yes.
Romano Prodi told me that when we are talking now in 2011, when the troubles started in Libya, Gaddafi was very ruthless with his opposition. We must say this. And there was a talk. Let's take military action against Gaddafi's government. A number of tribal leaders from Libya, and you know that tribes are still quite important in different parts of Libya, got in touch with Romano Prodi and told him, please, tell the NATO countries, especially in this case the UK and France. The United States was also very much in favor of intervening. Obviously, NATO can do nothing without the United States because it not only finances 80% of its cost, but it has all the buttons and all the controls of everything. And they told him, please tell NATO that not to invade, not to attack. We will go to Gaddafi and we are sure that we can manage a kind of peaceful transition
Well,
of power. And when Prodi contacted the French, first he contacted the Italian Prime Minister, then the French, and they told him, no, 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 we don't care, we don't care. We have decided, and that's what we're going to do. Now, obviously, 14 years later, we still have a tragedy in Libya. Even this week, just at the beginning of this week, killings have started again, militias shooting at each other. There is still no state. So, as you say, and we have one story after another, you
yes,
know.
Everest, with Libya, apart from the tragedy that happened inside Libya because of what's happened, but also the fact that they gave up their nuclear program, and that was an opportunity for the West to embrace them, to give an example to other countries wanting nuclear weapons,
Yes.
that if you give them away, you can become
But,
part
but
of the.
instead, actually, what happened in Libya sent a terrible message to political leaders: do not give up your
Yes,
nuclear
exactly,
science because they will destroy you anyway.
exactly. Because
So
now we have Israel saying we want a Libya type solution for Iran, and of course Iran knows what that means.
yes, and especially as we know that right from the very beginning, Israel was helped to acquire nuclear weapons.
Exactly.
So Israel can acquire nuclear weapons because it has obviously
Yes.
God on its side, and whatever Israel wants to do has a divine blessing about it. You can
Yes.
murder children, you can starve them, you can kill not 52,000. Probably the Lancet report about over 100,000 killed.
I can't believe this is happening in this
It's
day and age. Everything was
it's
being
terrible.
broadcast live.
It's terrible. It's terrible. So this idea of two ways and two measures, again, Tafhim, I think this is the issue now. If I think I am superior to you, if I think that you are not even human, because when you hear Netanyahu and his ministers, and unfortunately a big part of the population of Israel talking about the Palestinians, it's as if they're not talking about
You
human
know,
beings.
humans, yeah, exactly.
I heard a former minister yesterday saying, no, we should kill all the babies because in 15 years' time, those will become
Yes,
terrorists. He was actually saying it, you know,
it's
and
disgusting.
thinking and accusing Netanyahu of being soft. Can you imagine accusing Netanyahu of being? So if I think that I am superior to you, there is a law for me and a
Yes,
law for you. A law for the gods and a law for the animals. And I do not judge you by my law
yes,
because I want you to do what I want you to do. So this is what
yes,
causes problems and tragedies and millions of deaths that can be avoided. In the meantime, the planet is suffering.
yes.
We have lost completely our commitment to do something about global warming. Problems of poverty still exist. Problems of inequality still exist. There are
And that's
still
what I was,
millions of children who don't go to school. So
exactly. And that's also what I was going to say about lost opportunities. The opportunity that was lost to bring Russia, after the Cold War ended, to bring Russia into the community of European Union and make it part of, like
yes, yes.
embrace it, but instead
Imagine.
we humiliated
Can
Russia.
you imagine? We won't believe it today that Russia asked to join NATO.
Yes, exactly.
So with a collective security like that, you wouldn't have one fighting against the other, a side fighting against the other. But this idea of deciding that some nations are evil,
Yes,
either because they are Islamic,
yes,
or even because they are from the East,
yes.
or China,
Chinese,
or
Russians.
Iran. It's good and evil, and I think it comes from centuries ago.
Yes,
I I was in Cairo. I was in Cairo last year, and I gave a speech about the genocide in Gaza. and it was called The Chronicle of a Genocide Foretold. Because right from the beginning in October, after the attacks of Hamas, Netanyahu gave a speech where he actually told the Israeli Defense Forces, go into Gaza and remember Amalek, destroy all their animals, all
Exactly.
their wives, all their babies, their sucklings, destroy everything.
Yeah.
So it was an excuse for the Americans and the Europeans not to know what he was going to do. I remember the German chancellor at that time, Scholz, said, we are sure that Israel is a democratic country and they will abide by the rules of war. I mean, that's
Ridiculous.
such hypocrisy, such terrible.
Everest, you're talking about how Malta has to balance its neutral position and still create room for itself um, to create opportunities. Why was Ukraine not able to do that? It could have had such a successful
Yes, and
future.
there are other very good historical examples for that. Austria, Austria, Austria was squeezed between the two superpowers. They decided that the best way, instead of being cut up in two like Germany and Berlin, was let's make sure that this space is a bridge,
Get the best of
for
both.
the two. Yes, and it was possible for Ukraine. It was possible, but those who wanted to mobilize, against Russia, instead wants to use Russia wants to use Ukraine as a sword against Russia. And in the meantime, the Ukrainians are losing their country, are losing their people, so many millions refugees. It's a tragedy, and it is so selfish. And this, as we said, could have been avoided, and apart from it, could have been avoided even a few weeks after the war started.
Yes.
And in Istanbul, the Russians and the Ukrainians met and initialed an agreement.
And Boris Johnson.
Boris Johnson, obviously,
Shameful.
playing Winston Churchill, went to tell them, don't worry, we're going to support you till the end. Now we are at the stage where the Europeans are wanting to continue somehow or other. I think I can't understand how they think they can. With the Americans, the Russians have occupied more than 20% of the Ukraine. So how are now, if the Americans move away, only with the Europeans they're going to manage to drive the Russians back into Russia? This is irresponsible, crazy, terrible, and even bad for Europe itself.
Yet I don't understand. There's so many things that are just completely insane, irrational. How did most European countries, but specifically Germany, allow its economy, its industry to be sacrificed for this war that has no sense at all,
Yes.
and without any kind of pushback, without any resistance?
No, I mean, let us keep in mind something which is obvious, but it doesn't seem to be obvious, and it doesn't seem to be sober anymore. This year, 2025, we should be celebrating the Helsinki CSC spirit of 1975, when both sides of the divide in Europe, both Western Europe and Eastern Europe, the Soviet Union, the United States, Canada, and others, got together and said, listen, let's build a system of collective security. So we had people who were, I think, political giants on both sides, both from the Soviet Union, from Eastern Europe, and also from Western Europe. People who believe that you should talk to your enemies, you should keep good relations, and try to solve problems by negotiating, by thinking of the future. Today's leaders, instead of learning from those leaders, are actually destroying their own countries, because this is what it amounts to. I mean, when you hear the American president tell you, we will destroy Nord Stream, if you allow it to operate.
Yes.
And you don't even react.
And Germany's actually covering it up now. it's it's
It is
ridiculous.
so, it is so sad, because even if the European Union wants to build itself as some kind of regional military power, it needs a good economy. It needs a strong economy. It needs people. It needs technology. It is in decline, economically and politically and technologically. It has lost a lot of its importance, and countries that used to be its colonies have now overtaken it.
Germany had a reputation of making sensible decisions when it comes to the economy, and keeping a tight grip on things.
Yes, and you had people like Willy Brandt, like Helmut Schmidt, even her Kohl and Merkel. It doesn't mean that you agreed with whatever they did, but they looked after the national interest of their country without hurting others. We've come to a stage as if, for me to go, to get better, I need to hurt you.
Yes.
And but in the meantime, we end up hurting each other, because that's what happens there.
Everest, how do you see the future of Europe in terms of security now, given that we are with USA kind of reluctant to provide that umbrella of security for Europe, and Europe wanting to now create their own security? Are we going towards like a European army? Where are we heading?
Yes, but that is. I remember I was in the discussion of strategic autonomy, where Europe, because this idea that the United States has been financing Europe, and there was a lot of resentment, and from the point of view of the Americans, even when you have private chats with American diplomats, I remember they used to refer to the Europeans as parasites, and with a lot of contempt, and laugh when they hear that Europe will build its own military power, will be strategically autonomous. They used to laugh, and they said, well, we don't believe that it's going to happen, because, as we said, to be a military power. Now, whether you agree with military power or not, I mean, I hate war. I hate war because the resources that we put there can be used for other areas, and the military industrial complex, its market is wars, and they do all they can to keep on influencing think tanks, politicians, and then try to persuade people that the only alternative is to go to war. So it's terrible. It's terrible. But even, as I said, for Europe to build its own military autonomous power, they have to have a strong economy. They need a strong economy. They need strong technological development, and they are weak. They are weak in both. If they think that there's a shortcut by producing military tanks instead of cars, I think that is being very short-sighted. Being very short-sighted.
Also, there's so many conflicting interests within Europe. I'm struggling to see how this is going to work. So, I think there was some talk about France providing nuclear umbrella to Germany, but I can't see how countries like Germany would want to have that umbrella. So come out of the American protection and go under France's umbrella for nuclear protection.
Yes, and so far it has been convenient.
Yes.
For daddy to be the United States, not to be another European state. So the different European countries would accept the United States as big sugar daddy on the other side of the Atlantic.
Yes.
But I don't think they're going to accept. I don't think that the Germans would accept a French president to decide.
Yes.
Well, I think what I find very sad. Recently, there was a very good speech given by Mario Draghi at the Coimbra conference, and it was I think it was a very strong, honest analysis of the strengths and weaknesses of the European Union, and he was pointing mainly then at the weaknesses following his report on how Europe needs to take quite a lot of strong measures to become competitive and to have its economy grow again, to have technological development. Unfortunately, one thing that was completely missing from his speech, and I was really disappointed, was diplomacy. The European Union must learn diplomacy again and must learn a bit of humility
Humility, exactly.
to live with the rest of the world. But listen, I think 600 years of colonialism, not easy to overcome, and not easy to accept, that you are not anymore in a position to dictate to others what to do.
Evarist, working within the European Union system as you did, how did you see? Was it like a a default split? Was it like Western countries versus Eastern Europe? Was it big economies versus the smaller countries? Was it imperial nations versus those that were colonized before? How was there a default kind of an attitude?
Well, it's a mixture of all the things that you mentioned. It's not just one thing, one or the other. First of all, the idea of thinking that the European Union is some kind of mystical body where everyone is equal,
Yeah.
that is not real. I mean, come on. We know that it's one thing to be Germany, it's one thing to be France, uh, and they are recently I have described the European Union like an old-fashioned train with first class, second class, and third class. So the issue of size, the issue of economic strength, the issue of military power, that obviously means that there isn't an equal European Union. Also, I think this is I think the biggest challenge that the European Union faces if it continues to move towards a one-size-fits-all kind of federation where nation states are weakened and where national governments have to give up more power to Brussels, to the
Yeah.
institutions in Brussels. I think the European Union is going to have a very turbulent future if it does that. Because
Because you're going backwards in that.
yeah, and what is happening? So I think what is happening is this: with Brexit, you had a country leaving. I remember Michel Barnier giving a very good speech reflecting on Brexit and said, "Listen, instead of condemning Britain, we should try to understand what caused Brexit."
Mm.
Obviously, the campaign to leave, I think, was very dishonest because a
Yes.
lot of things were promised. A lot of things were promised, which obviously were not true. But what Barnier said, I think, is very important. What caused Brexit? Now, since Brexit, I think what we have is citizen exit. So instead of having countries leaving, you have citizens leaving and turning against the EU. Because if you have people who are not participating in elections, if people feel disenfranchised, if they support parties that oppose the European Union, eh, instead of condemning these parties, instead of condemning those citizens, try to understand why it's happening. I think that a house should be built from the bottom up, not from the roof down. If the European Union is going to allow itself to be a one size fits all house that is built from the roof down, it will collapse. It
Yeah.
will collapse. It's we know how difficult it is to hold that one country together. Imagine imposing one model on 27 states at different levels of development, with different cultures, with different histories, with different identities. And we should try to work with those differences, not try to make everything the same.
This is what I'm trying to envisage, like with um, the globe going into like a multipolar um, geostrategic situation, and then different countries within Europe may find that they have interest either with China, with USA, or elsewhere. So how are they going to? I'm finding it difficult to see how they can stay united. And with on top of all of that, with the security concerns, managing security as well. If each individual country is going to manage its own security, that's going to cause bigger problems in Europe going forward.
I remember having an interesting discussion with Charles Michel about this, the president of the European Council at the time. He didn't have a very high profile while he served because actually the president of the commission has a higher profile. But I found Charles Michel to be quite a wise leader, but he didn't have much say in what was happening. Von der Leyen didn't let him, Ursula von der Leyen, who is a micromanager and wants to do things her way and doesn't want people not to disagree with her. She's that kind of leader. But I remember discussing with Charles Michel that actually we should turn on its head. Now, this might sound crazy. A lot of people say the European Union is weak because it doesn't have a common foreign and security policy. I belong to those who say, it shouldn't have a common foreign and security policy. Why? Because if you have 27 countries, imagine it's as if you have a coalition government.
Yes.
Some countries will get on with Turkey.
Yes.
Some countries will get on with China. Some countries will get on with Russia. Some will get on with India. Some will get on with Morocco. I'm just giving some realistic examples. No, we say no. No, instead of that, let's try to find a kind of common factor where we shouldn't make use of the diversity of governments that we have and of relations that we have. No, we should have one approach. So if we decide to have good relations with China, let's sign a comprehensive agreement, and then a few months later, we don't do anything about it, and we think that we can also fight China. So we can fight Trump, we can fight Russia, we can fight China. This becomes ridiculous then. There is an Italian comedian called Fantozzi, and he has a film which is Fantozzi contro tutti, Fantozzi against everyone. And the European Union cannot become a comedy like that. No, being against everyone. It should be the other way around. It should build good relations with everyone, And it is possible. I'm not talking, this is not romanticism. This is not an illusion. It is possible if you don't have pretense of domination. If you want to dominate, if you want to dictate, you will have problems with others, because if they don't want to be dictated to, and now they are in a position where their economies are stronger than yours, their technology is stronger than yours, how do you expect then to continue play the superior partner and then not the partner, the superior master,
It's the same problems that because the UK wanted out of Europe because they were saying we want to be able to make our own trade alliances with countries like China, India, but in reality they came out of Europe and then they went and started lecturing China on how they need to manage their democracy, human rights. So it's all lectures and
but again, I would say there's a lot of hypocrisy, and at the same time there's this mentality of I'm superior to you. Exactly. I want to you must accept the values that I tell you.
Yes.
You must be democratic, how I define democracy. You must have civil rights the way I tell you what to do. You must do whatever I tell you.
Yes.
That is not the way. That is not the way to. That is still a colonial hangover. You still think, the empires are still there. Recently there was an Italian editor who wrote a book, The Empires Are Back. No, the empires have never left. We have had decolonization, but the process is still continuing. Decolonization is still continuing. Basically, we still have international relations in terms of institutions like the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the Bretton Woods, which is now in a crisis. But that still reflects the dominance of the United States with its dollars and with its, institutions to serve it. Let us remember that in 1948, when the war was over, the United States was worried that it was going to lose its dominance. It was the only country that emerged out of the Second World War without, apart from Pearl Harbor, suffering any damage and destruction on its homeland. And it didn't want to lose its dominance, and it created institutions to ensure its dominance. Now those are entering into a crisis, and that's why there is BRICS, that's why there is ASEAN, that's why the Africans have started to try and unite the continent. But that is what should happen, that these movements should be from the countries themselves upwards, working with others.
Yes. You mentioned Turkey. How do you see this standing ambition of Turkey to join Europe and their inability to do so? How do you see that whole episode?
I used to deal quite a lot with Turkey because I remember the French were particularly angry at me because I cultivated good relations with Turkey. We needed good relations with Turkey also because, first of all, I believe that as a small country, and I think what applies to small countries should apply to medium and I think even big countries.
Yes.
You should have as many friends as possible. You don't have the luxury to make enemies. Definitely, as a small country, we want to get on with as many. If there are 193 different member states in the European Union, we should be friends to all. And when they have problems amongst themselves, instead of taking sides, we should try to do something together with others to get them together, not to take sides and attack each other. So I used to cultivate our relations with Turkey also because Turkey was obviously and still does support the Western government in Tripoli. And as for us, it was important to have good relations with Libya. We also need to have good relations with them. And I remember I used to tell my colleagues, you are humiliating Turkey. This is not the way to treat Turkey. To lecture and to leave them more than 30 years waiting without. When it comes to migrants, yes, let's use them and let's make sure that we give them money to keep migrants there.
Yes.
But then not respect them and work with them. I doubted how much now the Turkish policy is to continue seeking membership of the European Union. First of all, I'm sure that even though, and there are politicians who say it, because Turkey is an Islamic country, they wouldn't want Turkey.
That is a big issue, though, because I've said that to people and they just laugh at me saying that.
No. There is still a lot of prejudice, and from Malta, I can tell you, our traditional historical narrative has been that we are there to protect Europe from Islam.
Yes.
Another part of the historical narrative was we are there to protect Catholic Europe from Eastern Orthodox Christians, which then becomes translated the global South, basically. The Eastern Orthodox Christians become Russians, and Islam remains Islam. So the kind of historical narrative of being Christian against Islam. Okay, today we live in a secular world, but that mindset is still there. Good versus evil. I don't understand your culture. Instead of trying to understand your culture and let's find ways of living together, I say that your culture is inferior to mine because I don't agree with you. There is still a lot of that. And it is sad because there are ways. It's difficult. It's difficult to for different cultures to live together, but it can be done. If you work at it, it's not going to happen automatically.
Everest, I was also so I often think that like in the past 2 or 3 decades, there's been so many wars being created by US-led Western powers. And as we were talking, war, obviously, it goes without saying, war is a bad thing. It's a waste of resources, human resources. But I often think if you're going to fight these wars, I just can't see any sense in them because on one hand, you're saying that your main competitor is China, and that's your peer competitor. So instead of focusing on China, you've started a war with Russia and brought Russia closer to China, and then you're bullying Iran and bringing Iran closer to Russia and China.
But that's not what they believe. That, Afim, I can tell you. I remember having a discussion in the European Foreign Affairs Council, and I was arguing the same way that you are arguing. I said, listen, if you're going to attack China as well, you are pushing Russia into the arms of China.
Yeah.
And I can tell you that they believed that this was not going to happen, because they said, no, we can isolate Russia because Russia is afraid of China, because the Chinese are coming in through Siberia, they're occupying the land of. But imagine, this is the kind of analysis that led them to make those stupid mistakes of thinking that you can sanction Russia, that you can cut off Russia, you can weaken Russia militarily by keeping it, embroiled in a military war with Ukraine, but then try to destroy it through sanctions. But they believed that the world is made up of 14% of the world only, which is the West, no? They are 14%.
Yes.
Well, the other 86% are there. And Russia, actually, it helped Russia, and it's now helping China to diversify its trade links away
Yes.
from Europe, away from the United States. But there are 192 states in the world. Recently, I heard a very interesting analysis by Peter Schiff. He's an American economist, and he was one of the few people who actually predicted the financial collapse.
Yes.
And he's saying, come on, the United States needs the rest of the world more than the rest of the world needs the United States. The same applies for Europe. We have to find ways of living together, but not domination, not living over others, living with others as equal. And the Americans find it very difficult to do that, and the Europeans spoiled with centuries of colonialism.
It's hubris, yeah.
But I mean, the legacy of colonialism is still there. It's still there.
Everest, you've mentioned a few times the importance of diplomacy in this discussion, but previously as well, I've heard you talk a lot about the importance of diplomacy and how it's just not being used at all. It's just all bullying and force and armament. But when I look at like recently, you would have seen that China helped bring two opposing countries in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia and Iraq and Iran, closer together. And that was a sight to behold, because I was thinking, I can't remember the last time the Western countries brought any two enemies closer together.
Yes, of course. No, when that happens, you turn them against each other more.
Yes,
So that it's divide et impera, no? Divide and rule. Divide and rule within countries, and divide and rule among countries.
Yes.
I think one has to refer here to the Chinese civilization. There is what is called the Chinese civilization. What is interesting, and I go back more than 800 years, the first explorers to come to Africa and to come to this part of the world from China did not come to conquer, They came for trade. It is interesting.
Yes.
If you study the first explorers of China towards Africa and the first explorers of Europe towards Asia and towards Africa, you'll find two different cultures. From China, they were interested in trading, doing business. So they came down the Indian Ocean, Africa. They were interested in doing business, in being merchants. If you see what the Europeans did, uh, the Pope gave them permission to go and discover. It was called the doctrine of discovery. When you discover lands which are not inhabited by Christians, you can do whatever you like. You dominate them, you take them, you can even kill those people because they are not Christians. What is interesting and what is frightening is that a doctrine of discovery that was issued by the Pope in the 14th, 15th century was only withdrawn 3 years ago by Pope Francis.
Well,
And it's not a coincidence that Pope Francis withdrew it, because he came from Latin America, which was also attacked, invaded, with genocides, cultures destroyed. So he felt very strong about that.
that's so interesting. Yeah.
The popes before him, and there was John Paul II, for example, and Pope Benedict, you had indigenous people from Canada, from the Amazon, going to the Vatican and used to tell him, please withdraw that doctrine. It's called the papal bull. Withdraw it. And they didn't withdraw it. Only Francis did it. Pope Francis did it. He had the courage to say it doesn't apply anymore. And I'm mentioning this not simply to bring up the past, because the past is still very present. There is still the mentality that we are superior to you. You are subhuman. We tell you what to do. You have to do what we tell you. But this is this. Imagine the Europeans go to China to lecture them. When the Europeans go to Africa, if they go to Africa, because this is another tragedy, you have a neighboring continent, which in the coming years, the proportion of population in Africa and Europe will be 5-1.
Well,
It will be 5-1. You will have a lot of young children and young Africans, and 5 of those, and 1 middle-aged and elderly European. Imagine over the next years, the European Union demographically, because it has a demographic suicide,
yes.
will lose 57 million people in working age. Okay?
Yeah.
So how is it going to operate its economy? But that's another issue, because again, that is something which we never discuss seriously. Can I tell you that as Minister of Employment in the European Union, we never discussed migration and employment? Migration was always discussed only as a security and as a risk, and that it's an invasion and that it's terrible, but that is another issue which is very interesting, and I would be very happy to discuss it one day.
It is very interesting. I had a professor from University of London to discuss this very matter on this podcast, demography, the declining birth rates of Europe. I'd love to have this conversation with you, if you give us
Yes,
more time in
please.
the future.
Yes,
Um,
please.
Ev- Everest, you're such an interesting person. You're so knowledgeable and you have so much experience. I think it's sad for Malta to lose a politician like you. But what's your future plans? What are your um, you've been out of politics for 2 or 3 years now, so do you have a clear kind of path forward?
I've been very busy. I write a lot. I read a lot. I participate in a lot of conferences in different places, China, France. I'll be going to Geneva next week, Germany the week after. I have participated also to lead the Commonwealth Observer Group recently in Trinidad for the elections. So I'm quite busy, and
Yeah.
uh, So I speak up. When we must make use of the liberty to talk after you leave your official post. I used to try and speak even while I was in my post. Um, I wasn't a choir singer. I did have a distinct. I tried to have a distinct voice.
I was wondering this very thing because I was thinking quite often you see politicians, once they retire, they become really interesting.
Yeah, and usually the best ministers are retired ministers. No.
Yes, exactly.
I remember meeting a British Minister of Education when I was Minister of Education. He used to serve under Thatcher, and he told me, now as I have retired, I'm trying to correct the mistakes and make up what the messes I did as a minister.
Well, that's nice as well because a lot of them wouldn't even do that.
Yeah.
Um, Everest, in closing, can I ask, in your opinion, what are some of the biggest challenges for Malta in years to come, and how do you think that Malta is going to navigate those? Is it economy, immigration, population?
Listen, any country, whatever its size, needs room for maneuver, needs to have space where it can decide in its own interests. It doesn't mean that those are interests against others,
Yes,
but every country has its own reality. If the decision-making process cancels that reality, decisions will be taken, not in the interest of the people living in that country. So Malta faces that big challenge. And I think the two challenges are, one, if the European Union concentrates more power in the European institutions and cancels the reality of different countries, Malta will become a colony again. The other big challenge is, I don't know what's going to happen to NATO because it's not clear yet
yes,
what's happening to NATO in the coming years. But I think it would be a tragedy for Malta, either openly or silently join NATO. We need our neutrality. We need our neutrality like we need our sovereignty, like we need our democracy. Let us remember what sovereignty is all about: taking decisions in the interest of the people of the country that we're talking about. If that is lost, you become a colony again. If Malta, either, either openly, becomes part of NATO, and you can become part of NATO without having warships in the harbor and without having fighting jets in your airport. If you become a logistical hub of NATO, you have become part of NATO again, which means that you have joined an alliance against the rest. It's not in the interest of Malta. I think it's not in the interest of most of the countries in the world not to be part of military alliances, but to have good relations with as many different people as possible.
yes. Everest, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time, your insights.
My pleasure.
Um,
Pleasure.
I really enjoyed this discussion, and I'd love to have you back one day if your schedule
Up
allows.
to you. Yes, my pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. All the very best.